Hi, everyone. My name is Asha Creary, and I am back with another episode of Post Grad with Asha. And this is the NCE edition, so National Counselor Exam edition. So the previous video went into section 1 of the NCE, what type of information is disclosed in each one of those sections. And it also went into some examples throughout the video. So we're going to get into professional practice and ethics, section 1, sample questions. So we're going to go into some questions that align with the previous video that was uploaded. So if you have not watched it, please feel free to take some time to watch it. So who am I? Some of you hear it in most of all of my videos, but I'll go into it again and we'll jump in. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. I'm an approved licensed professional counselor supervisor in Missouri. I'm an educator, a mentor, and a clinic director here in Austin, Texas. I have a small private practice by the name of Crave Counseling. So, of course, my name is Asha Creary, in case I didn't say it at the beginning, but let's get into it. So in section 1, we're going to look at the counselor's knowledge, skills, and abilities related to maintaining proper administrative and clinical protocols. So professional practice and ethics, that is what we're looking at. So in this section, we're going to assess yourself or the counselor's competency to work with a specific client. We're going to understand statistical concepts and methods in research. We're going to practice legal and ethical counseling, clarify counselor-client roles, discuss clients' rights and responsibilities, discuss limits of confidentiality, explain counselor agency policies, review payment fees and insurance benefits, explain counseling processes, procedures, risks, and benefits, inform clients about the legal aspects of counseling, discuss confidentiality as it applies to electronic communication. We're going to establish group rules, expectations, and termination criteria, assess competency to provide informed consent, monitor the therapeutic relationship and build trust as needed, review client records, provide adequate accommodations for clients with disabilities, provide information to third parties, provide referral sources. If counseling services are inadequate or inappropriate, we're going to advocate for professional and client issues, seek supervision and consultation, create and maintain documentation appropriate for each aspect of the counseling process, and have awareness and practice of self-care. So before we get into it, I only have about one question for each one of these. I think there's some that may have 2 or 3, but for the sake of just having going through like how to actually answer the questions, what information to think about, I only did one question. Again, there's only about 19 questions on your exam. So I think this has about 25 to 26 questions. I can't remember. So it's only worth 12%. So that's the main reason why I only did one question under each subsection, because you really just don't know what type of question you're going to get and what that's going to look like. So I kind of created some just to hopefully give you an idea of like my thought process, how I answer it, and what information to remember as you answer the question. So let's get into the first question. So a 61-year-old comes in with a presenting problem of depression and anxiety according to their intake forms. During the intake session, you realize this client is struggling with dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. The client is adamant about you supporting them because they believe you are a great fit. At this time, you have no formal training when it comes to working with acute psychotic disorders. What is the best next step for you? So this is under subsection 1, or A, I think it's how it's listed. So assess the counselor competency to work with a specific client. So of the answer choices you have, I would continue working with the client because they think I'm a great fit. I can provide them with a list of referrals immediately following the session. I would schedule a follow-up appointment. I would discuss limitations of my current counseling skills, discuss potential harm, and support client in finding a therapist that will be able to best support the client. So before we answer this, let's get into some quick test taking skills. So the first thing is usually all of the appropriate answer is usually the longest answer choice. So let's start there. Then the next biggest thing is after you've read through them, if you're down to like 2 or 3, really deciding which one is the best choice. So I'm going to go through each one of these after I give you 10 seconds to think about what your answer is going to be. All right, so if you chose D, that is correct. So let's go into why the other answer choices are not right or not the best answer choices, because sometimes there's always two right answers. It's just a matter of which one's the best answer. So let's start with A. I will continue to work with the client because they think I'm a great fit. Not necessarily. You're not competent to work with this client because you shared in the question that you have had no formal training when it comes to working with acute psychotic disorders. So I don't necessarily believe that as a clinician, you're competent to work with this client. Some would argue differently, depending on where you work at. They might just throw you in and say, you just got to figure it out, right? So that's not the best answer choice at all. So B is, I can provide them with a list of referrals immediately following the session. This could be right? Especially because you realize that you're not competent to treat this client or this disorder. So you could say B. That's a potential answer choice. C, I would schedule a follow-up appointment. You can, but it's probably not best practice because you have already figured out that you're not competent to treat these specific disorders or these types of clients. So you can schedule a follow-up. You can do consultation in between. You can do research. You can do some training, but that's not necessarily the best fit because this client might need the most support next week, not in 4 weeks or in 3 months after you've done training and after you've done consultation, right? So C wouldn't be the best answer choice. Then we go down to D. I would discuss limitations of my current counseling skills, discuss potential harm, and support the client in finding a therapist that would be the best support for the client. So if you had to choose between B and D, of course it's going to be B. All of these steps need to happen, right? Discuss why you're not a good fit with this client. Hey, I'm not trained. I don't have the skills to best support you. Discuss the potential harm if you chose to move forward. As much as this client is adamant, just letting them know I could potentially cause you harm. And then the next thing is, I'm not going to leave you out here hanging. Although you really, really want me to be the clinician supporting you, I'm not going to leave you hanging, but I will support you in finding someone who can really help you in the way that you need because I am not competent to support you. So D is the best answer choice. All right, so the next subsection type of question that goes with the second subsection is understanding statistical concepts and methods in research. So what is the biggest deterrent in enrolling in therapy? This is an example of what type of data collection. So we have A, quantitative, B, qualitative, C, mixed methods, D, none of the above. So I'll give you about 10 seconds to think about this answer choice, and then we will get into the correct answer. All right, so if you chose qualitative, that is correct. So the reason why quantitative is not correct because it usually aligns with some sort of numbers. It is going to be asking you something like how much, how many, what numbers, measurements, tests, years. It's going to be asking you something about quantity of something in the research. Is not mixed methods because mixed methods would include both qualitative and quantitative. So if we know quantitative is not the correct answer, then we can cross out C as the correct answer. Qualitative is why. Why, of course, this question doesn't necessarily have the word why in it. It's basically, why are you not enrolling in therapy? Although it says, what is the biggest deterrent? Why are you not enrolling in therapy is actually the question. So qualitative is the correct answer. And of course, it's not none of the above because clearly we're pulling qualitative data from this particular participant in answering questions about what's keeping them from engaging in therapy. So if you chose B, you got it right. Remember, qualitative is quality, what qualities, what, why, the existential part of it. Quantitative is hard numbers, data, the how many, how much. So let's get into the mean, median, and mode of the following data. So we have the numbers 9, 3, 1, 8, 3, 6. So mean is the average. Median is the middle number. Mode is the most. Range is the difference between the biggest number and the smallest number. So let's start doing method of elimination. So the smallest number we have, we can start with range because that's easiest. We can calculate this in our head. We'll start with the range. Wait, I'm gonna let y'all do it. Let me give y'all 10 seconds to figure out which one is the correct answer choice, and then I will break down the answer choices. All right, so if you chose A, that is correct. All right, so let's break down which ones we could cross off. So we can start with range, the biggest number minus the smallest number. 9 minus 1 is 8. So we can cross out C. Mode is 3. All of them have it, so we're still left with A, B, and C. The median number, remember, for median, you line them all up. You cross off left, cross off right, cross off left, cross off right, until you get to the middle. So when you get to the middle, if there's two numbers, you add them and you divide them. So we can already cross off D as in dog. Now we're left with the mean and the median to figure out which is which. So to figure out the median, we can line them up from smallest to greatest. So it'll be 1, 3, 3, 6, 8, and 9. I probably should have wrote this out in the PowerPoint. I didn't think to do it, but here we are. So cross off 1, cross off 9, cross off 3, cross off 6. Now we're left with 3 and 8. I'm sorry, you cross off 8. Now you're left with 3 and 6. So 3 plus 6 is 9. 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. So the median is 4.5. We can go with answer choice A. Now, if we wanted to calculate the mean, which is the average, we would just do 1 plus 3, which is 4, plus 6, which is 10, plus 3, which is 13, plus 9, which is 22, plus 8, which is 30. So we have 30, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 numbers. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So our answer choice is A. Now, this may not be the type of data question you get on the test. This is just an example that I included here for the sake of, you can get questions, statistical data related questions is going to be asking you specific numbers or specific responses in regard to the data that you're looking at. Okay. The next one, the next subsection is practice, legal, and ethical counseling. So a client has come into the session and shared that they won a huge settlement. They shared they would like for you to increase your rates for them so they could pay you more for your services. You decided to raise your rates for this client only. Please select the best response. So I'll read them and I'll give you a few seconds. This could be an ethical violation because it can be considered as a form of gift giving since the clinician didn't raise the rates for all of their clients. The clinician should discuss the ethical dilemma with the client and notate it in their records. Option B, this could be an ethical violation because the clinician is taking advantage of the client. Option C, the clinician should accept the additional payment and not report it to their respective licensing board. Option D, this is not an ethical violation because clinicians have the ability to raise their rates as long as they provide adequate notice to clients. All right, so let's take a step back. Well, no, I'm gonna give you 10 seconds to answer the question and then we'll get into the answer choices. All right. If you chose A, that is correct. So remember what I told you about the longest answer choice is more than likely the correct answer. That's not always true, but a lot of times that is true when it comes to taking standardized exams. The most comprehensive answer, again, is usually the longest response. So let's break down why the other answer choices are not correct. So let's say B. It says this could be an ethical violation because the clinician is taking advantage of the client. The clinician didn't take the money. Well, technically they did because you raised your rates for this client only. So yeah, that is completely unethical. It is completely unethical because if you're going to raise your rates for one, you have to raise it for all. You would be taking advantage of a client that is underneath your care, that has been considered to have like a mental health illness or be in a situation where they don't have the capacity to make the best decisions for themselves. And as a clinician, your job is to not take advantage of them, not take advantage of them. It is in the code of ethics, your state, the ACA, the APA, NASW, LMFT, all of these organizations have it in here to not take advantage of your clients and to make sure that you have a duty to protect your clients. So taking from someone who is in a place where they can't really make healthy choices is not the best thing to do. The clinician should accept the additional payment and not report it to their respective board. Again, do not take advantage of your clients, because if you do, and let's say they come to their right state of mind, not saying that they're not right, let's say they come to their right state of mind and they report you to the board because on your website, your marketing rates at $150 per session, but you've been billing them at $600 per session, you're going to lose your license. You're going to lose your license. So just remember, like, although they may say that, don't do it. I don't think in the ACA or the NBCC Code of Ethics, they have it listed the nominal amount that you can accept as a gift. But in the Texas LPC Code of Ethics, you cannot receive a gift more than $50. Now, the only thing that the LPC Board of Ethics has not included is the frequency of those gifts. So if you got a client that's like giving you $50 gifts every week, you might need to set boundaries. Again, it could look like you're taking advantage of them, and it could also look like you're developing an inappropriate relationship with this client. Option D. It's not an ethical violation because clinicians have the ability to raise their rates as long as they provide adequate notice to client. This is true, but in the question it said for this client only, you didn't raise rates for nobody else. So again, you're going to be in trouble. All right, so let's go back to answer choice A. It is an ethical violation because it could be considered a form of gift giving because you didn't raise your rates for everyone, or it could also be considered as an ethical dilemma because I didn't include this in this answer choice, but because you could be taking advantage of your client and you could potentially be causing harm. Just because they got a lump sum settlement, you may be taken from their debt. You may be taken from their family. You may be taken from their household, and they may be falling behind on bills because they feel like they need to give you this thing. You also want to notate it because if they go to the board and they say, well, this happened, if it's not notated, it could have happened. But if it's notated and you reported it and you went into a discussion with the client about why you won't do it, then you're more likely to be protected should something come out of this on the back end. So again, let the client know it's unethical. If they do want to give you something, don't get you anything more than $50 and set a limit on maybe just once you can get me something. If you feel it on your heart to do it, I'm not asking you for it. I don't need it. But making sure you set limitations so that it doesn't bite you in the butt later. All right. So clarifying counselor and client roles is the next subsection. Which of the following are not a part of the counseling role? So answer choice A, goal setting and treatment planning. Option B, advocating. Option C, developing a therapeutic relationship. Option D, befriending clients. So I'm gonna give you a few seconds to decide on what you think the answer choice is. All right. So if you chose D, befriending clients, that is correct. It is not our role or our duties to befriend a client. You cannot befriend your clients. They are not your friends. They are your client. There's a transaction happening. Do you pay your friends every time you talk to them? No, you don't. So if they were your friends, you wouldn't be receiving payment for services. Now, if you work in an agency, that's neither here nor there, right? So goal setting and treatment planning. Every client should have goals. Every client should have a treatment plan, especially according to the code of ethics. If you're seeing a client, they should have a treatment plan. They should have goals. Advocating. So if you have a client that's in a position where they don't know how to navigate a system, your job is to help them in advocating for themselves. Your job is also to advocate on their behalf regarding, just life in general, as far as like the licensing board, how it could potentially impact clients, insurance, how it could potentially impact clients, just different things you can support your client in advocating through, with, and in. Developing a therapeutic relationship. Yes, you should be doing that. If you're not developing a therapeutic relationship, you're probably harming that client. All right, so discuss clients' rights and responsibilities. The client just as an important role. Let me redo that. The client has just as an important role in their care as does the clinician. True or false? Alrighty, so that is true. If the client is coming to you and you guys are working on goals and different things like that, you can't do the work for them. So they have just as an important role as you do. You can support them in navigating things, but they have to be the one to do the work that they agreed that they were willing to do based on what they said they had the capacity to do in therapy and outside of therapy. So your clients have an equal role, or just as important, right, role as does the clinician. Discuss limitations or limits of confidentiality is the next subsection. So, breaking a client's confidentiality can be necessary in some instances. So we have option A, could be due to the cause of a malpractice suit. Option B is necessary in some instances or circumstances. Option C can happen without notifying client. And D, all of the above. Give you a few seconds to really think about this question. All right. So, breaking a client's confidentiality can be necessary in some instances. So, it is going to be all of the above. And it's all of the above because it can be due to a malpractice suit. So if the client comes and sue you because they said something and you get called to go to court, either court or in front of the board, and they're asking you all these questions, that's the limitations of confidentiality. Sometimes you have to break it if you're dealing with a lawsuit. B, it's necessary in some circumstances. So if you think about what your role is as a clinician, you are a mandatory reporter. So if you have a client that says, I am going to go and harm this person immediately following work at this time, I have a plan, intent, and a method, and I got intent, I'm going to do it, then you may have to call that person and warn them that they are in harm's way, or you may have to call the local law enforcement to intervene because someone else is in danger. Sometimes when you're working with minors, you have to disclose to parents that a client has a plan or intent to harm themselves or anyone else in the household. You also have a mandatory duty to report sexual assault. You have a mandatory duty to report inappropriate relationships, all kinds of things. So there are some instances where you just have to break confidentiality. Again, you don't want to do it with the intent of of negative impact, meaning like, oh, I'm just doing this because I don't like this client. Not for those reasons, making sure that if you are breaking confidentiality, you understand why you're doing it. And then it can happen without notifying them. Again, sometimes you don't have to tell clients that you have to call CPS. Sometimes you don't have to tell clients, hey, I'm going to talk to your mom about this. It just depends on the age and the state that you're in. I know some states it's 14, where 14-year-olds have some confidentiality. But if they're under the age of 14, there is no rules for confidentiality in regard to communicating with parents. So you just kind of have to know your state laws. Alrighty, explain counselor agency policy. So this is a subsection. Okay, which of the following is an example of an agency policy? An agency can waive copays. An agency can decline a client's insurance even though the agency accepts the insurance. The agency agrees to modify or reduce its fee based on the client's income and financial situation. An agency choosing to opt out of discussing payment options with the client. I'll give you a little bit to think about that. Alrighty, C. So let's get into some of the other answer choices as to why they're not correct. An agency cannot waive copays. That is insurance fraud. That is illegal. You can lose your license and you could be fined for waiving copays. Not many programs go into insurance, I don't believe, when you're in graduate school. So you would really have to go through your state's Board of Ethics to really understand the rules and limitations of accepting insurance when you're seeing clients, especially if you're going to be in a private practice setting. Now, if it's your business, you cannot waive copays. You will be in jail or you will be fined. I don't remember the rules in that, but you can get in trouble for that. An agency can decline a client's insurance even though the agency accepts insurance. So that is not true. If a client says, I want to use my insurance and you don't want to take it because it doesn't pay well, you can be in trouble for that. And I have seen people lose their license or be reprimanded for that. If you're in contract with an insurance provider and a client says they want to use their insurance, you have to agree to bill their insurance on their behalf because you agreed to a contract that stated that you would do just that. An agency can choose to opt out of discussing payment options with a client. That's unethical. You wouldn't have a client sign up and let's say you know they're struggling and they say, well, I actually can't afford this, and not go over their options. Many people have options like, hey, here's some agencies that have vouchers. We can take a small payment. We can do a sliding scale, whatever that looks like for your particular agency. All right, a client has an insurance plan in which you accept but chooses not to use their insurance. What are the best steps to follow? So I'll let you read these. All right, so if you chose, explain to the client the difference in cost for out-of-pocket services, have a client sign an insurance opt-out agreement, and let them know at any time they have a chance to begin utilizing their benefits. This is 100% true. Again, remember basic test taking, it's the longest answer choice. Again, not all the time will that be true, but it's the longest answer choice for this. So if you don't know anything about insurance, this one is the most comprehensive answer. So making them use their insurance anyway because it's cheaper for them, that could be harmful, because if you have a client that you're working with and they have suicidal ideations and they do not want that going through their insurance company for whatever the reason is, you cannot force clients to use their insurance. If they say they don't want to use their insurance, allow them to not use their insurance. Agree to provide services at out-of-pocket rates. You can, but this is a good answer choice. This is actually a correct answer, but it's not the best answer choice. So you can agree to bill at out-of-pocket rates. That's 100% okay. Option B, charge them higher cash rates because they are choosing not to use their insurance, and you can make more money this way. That's not right. That's not ethical if that is your reasoning behind charging them higher cash rates. If your cash rate is your cash rate, you can charge them that, but don't go up on a cash rate because a client is adamant they don't want to use their insurance. That's unethical, and it's just not best practice. So you want to explain to them the difference between how much it's going to cost if you don't use your insurance. You want to have them sign off on something that says, I am agreeing that I am opting out of using my insurance. I am aware that I cannot bill insurance beyond what I agreed to, right? Like if they say I want a super bill to bill my insurance, you're going to have to pay those clients back money. So again, learn insurance if you don't know it, especially if you intend to go into private practice. But I said all that to say is that you can't force clients to use their insurance, and you can't force clients into cash pay unless that's what they want to do. Now, if you don't take insurance, that's okay. But if you sign contracts and you're still in network with insurance plans, you have to take their insurance. Okay. So the next one is, during the initial session with the client, a counselor should provide verbal and written informed consent, discuss risks and limitations of counseling, discuss benefits of counseling, and describe the counseling process and procedures for scheduling sessions, access to records, contact between sessions, confidentiality, and emergency sessions. Give you a little bit to answer that. It is true. This is basic. What's the word I'm looking for? This is basic counseling skills 101. Basic counseling skills 101. So, yes, you want to get verbal and written informed consent. Now, if they're in a situation where they can't do written consent, maybe because they are amputees or something of the nature, or if they have visual impairments or something that is preventing them from being able to sign off on written informed consent, you want to make sure that you have we'll get into that later. So let's jump into the next question. The counselor carefully listens and draws out information regarding the client's situation, and the reason they have engaged in counseling is called what? Backtrack. This is a subsection of explain counseling process, procedures, risks, and benefits. So back to the question. So option A is goal setting, B, assessing the problem, C, treatment planning, D, intervention implementation. I'll give you a few seconds to answer this question and we'll go through the answer choices. All right, so if you chose assessing the problem, you are correct. So this isn't goal setting. Goal setting is where you and the client together develop some goals that they plan to work on in between sessions. Treatment planning is where you usually are planning your intentions for treatment for your client before the session, in between sessions, as far as like, what treatment am I going to provide to this client? Intervention implementation is usually where you have decided that this intervention is best for this client and you're going to implement it. So that's usually me using cognitive behavioral therapy in the intervention or in the therapeutic relationship. It could also be EMDR. It could also be, whatever your therapeutic modality is, that would more so be intervention implementation. You've developed an intervention that is going to support this client with getting over the curb with whatever issues they are struggling with. Assessing the problem. You're listening to the issues of concern, the symptomology, the ailments, and you're drawing out information regarding the client's situation and the reason that they have engaged in client counseling. So again, if your client comes in and they're like, I'm just sad, I don't know what to do, you're assessing the problem. Why are we here in counseling today? And that is what you're basically doing. You're listening, and you're pulling out that information from the client. Explain uses and limits of confidentiality is the next subsection. So When discussing the use of social media, it is important to discuss that the counselor will use social media as a form of informed consent if the client between sessions. I'll give you a few seconds to think about this. This is false. You will never use social media for your clients as far as looking them up, seeing if they've been implementing the goals. This is so unethical and it is harmful. Rule of thumb, always let your clients know if they come across you on the people you may know feed on Facebook or on Instagram or any of the other ones on your personal page to block you, or you would do the same. Also, rule of thumb, let them know that if they follow your business page on social media, it does not constitute a replacement for therapy. That is very, very important. Also, you will never use social media as an informal assessment regarding your client's state or symptomology in between sessions. It's just not something you do. Clinicians err on the side of self-reporting or direct observations. So if you're observing a client in the office engage in a relationship with their parent, and you're trying to assess for the problem or ways like PCIT, parent-child something, I forget what it stands for, but it's where the clinician's outside the window, they have an earpiece in, the parent and the child are engaging in counseling, and you're coaching the parent throughout the session, or you're just doing a observation of the family interacting with each other. You will only do formal observations to pull assessment details, or you will use, what's the word I'm looking for? Or you'll use, like I said, more self-reporting. They come in, hey, how have you been? Did you use your counseling skills? What have been some barriers in between counseling, the things? So that is not true. You would never use social media for your clients anyway. Don't look your clients up as a rule of thumb. Do not look them up on Google. If you have VIP clients, which will be considered your celebrities, never, never, never disclose that you have this VIP client. And also make sure that if you do have a VIP client and you have been following them on social media, make sure you discuss that with the client. And if they don't feel comfortable with you continuing to follow them on social media, delete, remove, because that was a pre-existing relationship. But again, you want to jump into your state's code of ethics when it comes to dual relationships, when it comes to seeing clients. So next question, it again falls under explain uses and limits of confidentiality. So a counselor may befriend a client on social media. This shouldn't take you long because I just gave you this whole rundown just a second ago. That is false. One, your clients are not your friends, as I've mentioned before. And two, you will not use social media for any purpose of counseling and having a therapeutic relationship with a client. Those two things just don't go together. It's unethical and it goes against your code of ethics. And depending on the state that you're in, it definitely goes against your state's code of ethics in regard to use of technology when it comes to integration of psychotherapy services. All right, so the next question or subsection is inform clients about the legal aspects of counseling. All right, so let's jump into this question. An adult client has decided to take you to court because you disclose a Sentinel event without their consent. What do you believe will happen in court? So I'll give you a few seconds to look up Sentinel if you don't know what that word is. And while you're looking that up, I'll read the answer choices. The judge may dismiss the case since you are a mandatory reporter. The judge will probably temporarily suspend or revoke your license. The judge will require you to provide monetary compensation because you disclosed information without their consent. The judge will take the client's side because you made a report out of malicious intent, even though the information was true and valid. So, before I give you a few seconds to think about that question, I'll tell you what Sentinel means if you didn't get a chance to actually look that word up on your phone or whatever. So Sentinel is where a client has disclosed to you that something harmful has happened, meaning unexpected death, serious physical or psychological injury, or the risk of abuse or neglect, different things like that. So sentinel events are basically your mandatory reporting events. If someone disclosed something that requires you to be a mandatory reporter or report something that they disclose, or a sentinel event that they disclose to you, and they try to take you to court because you called CPS, this is the answer. This is the question. All right, so let's get into the answers. If you chose A, you're right. Okay. The judge will temporarily suspend or revoke your license. No, because they disclosed an event that required you to disclose to a third party, whether it was law enforcement, CPS, it was an emergency situation, whatever the situation is where you had to disclose that information. The judge will not suspend or revoke your license because we are I forget the word I'm looking for, but we are protected from reports made in good faith, even if the report was not proven to be true. The judge will require you to provide monetary compensation because you disclosed information without their consent. That is not true because, again, if you received information that someone had a plan or intent to harm themselves or someone else, instances of abuse, if, whatever the situation is that forced you to have to report something, again, you are protected from good faith reports. So they wouldn't make you give them money. The judge will take the client's side because you made a report out of malicious intent, even though the information was true and valid. This is of course wrong because the client disclosed a sentinel event to you. You have to report it because you are a mandatory reporter. So they really have to prove malicious intent. Now, if you don't like this client and you was just finding and fishing and you were making up stories, that is malicious, and that probably wouldn't be true and valid anyway. So the correct answer is the judge will probably dismiss it because you're a mandatory reporter. All right, next subsection. Oh, let's go back to that real quick. So if you notice, remember how I said the longest answer choice is usually the right answer choice? In this case, that is not the case. So if you chose D because it was the wrong answer, because it was the longest answer choice, you probably messed yourself up. But that's why I put that disclosure in there earlier on when we first started. Okay, so this falls underneath the informed consent section. So a client comes in for counseling, but has a visual impairment and is unable to see or read the informed consent form. What should the clinician do in this instance? I'll give you a little bit to read over this. Remember, visual impairment, cannot see, cannot read. Written informed consent. All right. I think I selected the wrong one. I was just looking at that. So it should be C. If you chose C, that's correct, not A. So the reason A is not correct because it doesn't include this section, if they have a power of attorney or a legal guardian, have them complete it on their behalf. So it's not A because it's missing that, again, the most comprehensive answer choice. So it's not A. I stand confirm it's not A. I probably highlighted the wrong one. But it should be C. If they have a power of attorney or if they have a legal guardian, they should complete the forms on their behalf. If they do not, the clinician must go over all the information in the informed consent and allow the client adequate time to ask questions, and the client can be guided to the sections on the form in which they need to consent to treatment. Providers should document and probably bring in a third-party witness to sign alongside the clinician. So if you have an office manager or you have a colleague, y'all both can sit in the room, go over those things, explain, and both clinicians need to sign and notate that they were present and that, and maybe even write down the questions that the client had for the sake of protecting yourself. So B is not correct because you cannot deny someone's services because they have a disability. That is illegal and it is unethical. Your job is to support the client in a way that best supports their needs while they're trying to seek services. Only the client's power of attorney or guardian may sign documents on their behalf. That is not true, because just because someone has a visual or hearing impairment and they can't fully receive the information in a way that most people can, that doesn't mean that they have a legal guardian or a power of attorney. There are a lot of people who are deafblind who have the ability to go about life in the way that they want to. Okay, so discuss confidentiality as it applies to electronic communication. So let's get into these questions. I'm trying to speed up a little bit because this video is getting rather long, so I just want to make sure that I go through these. Okay, a client has obtained access to a clinician's phone number through the web and sent them a text message. The clinician has a right to. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, the answer is O. So that says C, but it really should be all except B. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm so sorry. If you're confused, that was my fault. There's a typo there. That should have said B. So if you were confused on none of these make sense, it's these two except this one, you're probably right. So it was D, all except answer choice B. So for answer choice A, you can terminate services because the client has went around the informed consent information, or they went around the ways that you provided them in which they can contact and communicate with you in between sessions. Again, when you get into your informed consent, you want to make sure you go into, this is how you communicate with me in between sessions. If you cannot reach me, if it's a medical emergency, the things, all of that should be in informed consent, but it should also be discussed in the initial intake session. You would want to discuss boundaries with this client, because even if you terminate them or if you choose not to, and you continue to see this client and you don't say anything, they're going to think it's okay to text you. And then B, that's not true. You as a clinician have rights. Even though your information, it may or is public, you have rights. All right, so the next one is establish group rules, expectations, and termination criteria. A clinician is facilitating an 8-week processing group, and in week 3, the clinician noticed that the group is beginning to work towards their goals and facilitate growth/change. Which phase of the group process is this? It is the performing phase. All right. Forming phase is you're getting to know each other. We're learning each other. We're learning the rules. Norming is, okay, we've come to homeostasis with this group. Adjourning means we're coming to the termination of this group. Performing is we're actively performing within this group setting. All right. Next one, assess competency to provide informed consent. So, a client comes in for their initial session and is exhibiting experiences with auditory and visual hallucinations. They shared that they believe that you, the therapist, are asking them to sign over their soul to the devil. The therapist can proceed with providing services without verbal and written consent. Really think about this. Really think about this question. And remember, the subsection is assess competency. This is competency of the client to provide informed consent. This is false. If a client is having auditory and visual hallucinations and they think that you are trying to have them sign their soul over to the devil, you would not want to proceed with services without verbal and written consent, because they're not competent right now. They're not in their right state of mind to sign over the fact that they are entering into services with you as a clinician. They don't even know that you are a clinician because they think you're signing their soul over to the devil. And you might just be the devil they're talking about, right? So you wouldn't want to proceed in services without having verbal and written consent, because you could potentially harm the client. Usually what you do is you allow them to come to a calm, more stable spot. Then you reassess for competency. And if they're safe, and if you're safe, then you can proceed with getting the informed consent. Always have a third party if you cannot get written consent. Again, also err on the side of your state rules and state laws. But for the sake of just what's in this thing, you wouldn't move forward without verbal and written consent, because again, you could be causing harm and this client might think you the devil. So you don't engage with that. You're going to mess yourself up in the long run, because a judge will say harm, as I said in my previous videos, maybe harm is in the eye of the beholder. So if the client is the beholder and you harm them, you're at fault. All right, the next subsection is monitoring the therapeutic relationship and build trust as needed. What is the best way to monitor the therapeutic relationship and build trust with the client? All right, so if you chose C, that is correct. Although there is not necessarily a best way to monitor the therapeutic relationship, like every client's monitoring needs look different. But if you had to go with the answer choices here, A is not the best choice. B, don't focus on the client's needs. You have to focus on the client's needs if you're treating a client for something, right? The next thing is going to be, the next one is going to be make them feel rejected. That is not true. That's going to cause harm to your client, and you just don't want to be on the other end of a potential lawsuit if that is the case. All right. Next one is C, of course. You're going to always make sure to make them feel welcome. Make sure you're making people feel welcome. Don't be out here. It is what it is. All right. So the next one is reviewing client records. So I do not need to make copies of payments made by the client, communication logs, or progress notes. Give you a little bit to think about that. All right, this is false. All of your code of ethics, from the ACA to the NBCC to the whatever your state licensing board is, they all tell you must maintain records of payments made, communication that you've had with your client as far as like phone calls, emails, and progress notes. Again, if you don't have progress notes and you're billing insurance, you are committing insurance fraud, because if it's not recorded, it did not happen. All right. So the next thing is going to be, what are some categories of psychotherapy accommodations for clients who have disabilities? And this falls underneath providing adequate accommodations for clients with disabilities. So I'll give you about 5 seconds. All of the above. Ergonomics, accessible communication. So if they have visual and hearing impairments, however you can use alternative communication methods in the session, you want to make sure you use that. And then structural, physical accommodations, again, in the office space. So if you have a rail, if you have wheelchair accessible thing, that's what you're going to need to include. All right, next section or subsection. Provide information to third parties. Clients have the right to have PHI, which is personally protected health information, directly to a designated third party. So protected health information, name, date of birth, diagnosis, email, address, those things. Give you a few seconds to think about it. Again, clients have the right to have PHI sent directly to a designated third party. Okay, we down to like the last 5 questions, y'all. My bad, it's such a long video. All right. True. If a client says, I need you to send my records to my physician, or I need you to complete this FMLA paperwork and send it back to said person, they have a right to request that. All right, next section. Provide referral sources if counseling services are inadequate or inappropriate. A client is seeking EMDR services, but you are not trained or equipped to provide the service. What should you do next? All right, so you should provide the client with a list of referrals. Do not attempt EMDR if you're not trained in it. Do not tell a client they don't need EMDR. That is probably not ethical, because if you've ever done EMDR training, you will learn that anyone can do EMDR. You may have to work through resourcing and different things like that before you integrate it, the full process, but there's no such thing as they don't need it. And not providing them with a list of referrals is just unethical. So because you don't want to lose the money, you don't want to provide them with the resource, don't do that. Provide the client with a list of referrals. Which of the following is not an example of advocating for professional or client issues? So this falls under the subsection of advocating for professional and client issues. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. All right. So if you ask the board to remove one of the client's rights from the code of ethics, that is not advocating for your clients. That is removing clients' rights, and that is not advocacy. Now, advocating for accommodations in school for a client, that's advocating for your client's issues in a school setting. Advocating for an increase in counselor rates by CMS, that is advocating for professionals in regard to how we are paid and how we are valued in the community. Asking the board to support with access to mental health services, that is advocating for professional and client issues. If you work for an agency, or if you ever did practicum or internship at an agency where you saw 1,000 clients in a day, but you're asking for access to mental health services, that's what you're doing. You're asking, how can we get more clinicians out here in the field and on the ground, boots on the ground? And then also from a client perspective, access to mental health resources is going to be more than helpful for them in their future care, especially as clinicians start to retire and transition out or decide they don't want to work with a certain population anymore. The next one is seeking supervision and consultation. So a Black male client has come in with the previous diagnosis of bipolar disorder from years ago following a stressful and traumatic time in their life. The client has not taken medication for the diagnosis in 10 years, but is still being treated for BPD. They do not show or present symptomology of bipolar disorder. You thoroughly review the DSM, but you are still unsure that the diagnosis is valid and would like to provide a different diagnosis. What should you do in this instance? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. And excuse the typo, that's above, not a boast. All right, it's all of the above. So yes, you would request a release of information and consult with the physician that is still treating them for bipolar disorder. Now, the physician may not be aware that they're not taking medication, maybe only you. So you would want to assess that as well during that time. Because if the client is not taking the bipolar medication and the symptomology that he's still being diagnosed with is not accurate or adequate, you want to talk with the physician regarding that. You have the ability to do case consultations with providers in other realms of healthcare. So again, if you're treating a client, you are treating the whole client. So if they have a physician, you're getting insight from the physician. If they have a dietitian or a nutritionist that has stated that their diet is impacting their symptomology, you're going to want to talk with the nutritionist or the dietitian, and anybody else involved in care, right? So you would always request a release of information to talk to other healthcare providers. And some insurance companies, depending on, or agencies or companies, will always ask for you to consult with them anyway. Based on the contract that you have with a particular insurance company, it may be required. But also, again, agencies' best practice, they may already be doing it, especially if it's like an inpatient facility. You're probably already communicating with the physician, the nurses, the nutritionists, the dietitians, all the people involved. B, pull some screeners or assessments to undergo further assessment for screening for BPD. So if you are not sure, you would want to do a screener. Ones that you are master level licensed to do if you're a master's level clinician, or doctoral psychologist level physician if you are licensed to do so. You're also going to want to consult with a clinician that specializes in or typically treats clients with bipolar disorder for guidance. So you may continue to see this client, and it may take you some time to get a hold of the physician. And you might get the screeners and you might not know what to do with the information from the screeners because it's not something that you necessarily treat, or you're trying to figure out if your line of thought process is correct. So all of the above. All right, the next one is create and maintain documentation appropriate for each aspect of the counseling process. What is the best practice when it comes to maintaining client or patient records? I'll give you a little bit to think about that. All right. The answer is completing charts within 2 days of treatment. So do not have written records in different places around the office, because if you leave them on the table, if you leave it in an unlocked space, if you drop it, if you didn't chart it, you don't want to have patient information all over the place. So make sure that it's in one spot and you know how to access, you know how to lock and secure patient information. Complete charts within 6 months of services. Of course you should. Of course you should, but that's not the best answer. Because if it's taking you 6 months to do charts, you probably don't remember what happened 6 months ago. And if it's taking you 6 months to chart, you're probably not billing your insurance panels. Now, if you're billing before you're locking charts, that's okay, but you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you don't have records when you get audited, if you get audited by an insurance company, or if the State Department comes out and audits your facility or your organization or your company. There is not a best practice for maintaining documentation. That is not true. You always want to follow your code of ethics, the NBCC, the APA, the ACA, the APA, or even your state regulated board. There's always a best practice according to your code of ethics. Also, complete charts within 2 days. If you leave today and you have a car accident tomorrow or the 3 days after the session, and you didn't put those records in, and you have a head injury and you can't remember what you did 5 days ago, and that client needs their records because they're applying for disability or because they're doing something with their records, that's going to put you in a lot of trouble. So I always encourage clients to do it within 2 days, or clinicians to do your charts within 2 days. Pre-chart, do the chart, read it over later, lock it, and keep it moving. Alrighty, awareness and practice of self-care, which is the very, very last section. All right, so requesting to shift caseload type or caseload balance is an example of what? Alrighty, it's all of the above. If you're asking for caseload balance, you're probably asking for your caseload to be reduced because you got too many clients. Requesting a shift in the caseload type. Let's say you're in a intensive unit and you always have high intensity patients, but you're looking for something a little bit more settled or not as intense when it comes to being at work every day. You're advocating for self-care, because if you're getting burned out because of the caseload type that you have, or because of the number of clients you have, you're not advocating for self-care if you don't speak up. And then boundaries around workplace mandated breaks and lunch. So if you have a huge caseload, or if your caseload type is causing you to work through lunch, you're probably not taking your state required lunch breaks, because if I have 8 clients and one goes into crisis mode and I still got to see my other 4 clients at the end of the day, you're going to be working during lunch. So you want to make sure that wherever you work at, whatever the facility, whatever the organization type is, that you ask for, hey, can I get a little less SI and a little bit more anxiety? Can I get a little less of this, a little more of that? Can I go down to from 28 clients to 26 clients to 24 clients? Making sure you advocate for that, because again, depending on your caseload type or your caseload balance, it may be impacting your lunch breaks or your 15 minutes breaks, of course, depending on your state. All right, so please feel free to like and subscribe. See you guys next time. Again, I didn't realize this video was going to be so long, but hopefully me going into the questions, and hopefully the questions are kind of in alignment with how you need to think about the different questions. Again, sorry for the typos. I thought I read through them all, but I only have one set of eyes. So thank you again for bearing with me, and good luck on studying through the first section of the NCE.